Some changes don't arrive with clarity. They don't come with decisions or plans or brave declarations made under the right light. Some changes begin much earlier than we notice. They begin in the body, in the way shoulders loosen, in the way breathing slows, in the way silence stops, feeling like something you need to escape. Daniel didn't realize when it started. If someone had asked him to name the moment his life shifted, he wouldn't have been able to point to it. There was no first kiss, no sudden realization, no sentence that felt final. There was only a series of evenings that felt easier, the kind of evenings where nothing remarkable happened, and yet nothing felt heavy either. He had spent most of his adult life believing that stability came later, that it was something earned after struggle, after ambition, after proving yourself useful enough to deserve rest. So rest always felt temporary to him, borrowed, unreliable. Even now, sitting at the small wooden table by the window, Daniel half expected the calm to vanish the moment he acknowledged it. Outside, the street was quiet, not empty, just settled. A bus passed, tires hissing softly against the wet pavement. Somewhere down the block, a door closed, life continuing without urgency. Inside, the apartment held the kind of stillness that didn't ask anything from him. The kettle clicked off on its own. He didn't jump at the sound anymore. That alone felt like progress. Daniel poured the water slowly, watching steam rise from the mug. Chamomile. He'd never cared for it before, but recently he found himself choosing it without thinking. Small choices like that had started happening more often. He carried the mug back to the table and sat down, resting both hands around the warmth. Across from him, Emma sat with her legs tucked beneath her, reading. Not scrolling, not multitasking, just reading. The lamp above them cast a soft yellow circle over the table, leaving the rest of the room dim but present. Daniel watched her for a moment longer than necessary, not because he was searching for something, but because nothing in him was urging him to look away. This was new. In past relationships, or attempts at them, stillness had made him uneasy. Silence felt like a test he was failing by not performing. Say something interesting. Do something meaningful. Prove you're worth staying with. But Emma never filled the quiet for him, and she never waited for him to fill it either. They had met in the least dramatic way possible. No story worth telling at dinner parties. They shared the same building, different floors, different lives. At first, they were just two people who happened to be awake at the same late hours. He would see her in the stairwell sometimes, barefoot, holding a small box of recycling. She would nod, offer a soft smile, and keep moving. It took weeks before they exchanged more than a greeting, and months before they shared anything that felt personal. That was the rhythm Emma moved at, unrushed, unforced. Daniel had spent years confusing intensity for connection, believing that if something didn't arrive fast, it wasn't real. Emma seemed to live by a different logic entirely. The night they first talked, really talked, was an ordinary one. He had been sitting on the front steps of the building, not quite ready to go inside his apartment. Inside meant thinking. Outside meant breathing. She came down the steps with a small grocery bag, paused when she saw him, and asked if the rain had started yet. That was it. Not a pickup line, not an opening statement, just a question rooted in the present. "No," he said, "but it smells like it might." She smiled at that, sat down 2 steps above him. They didn't exchange names right away. They talked about small things, the unreliable elevator, the cat that lived somewhere on the 3rd floor but never belonged to anyone, the way the streetlight flickered just enough to be noticeable. At some point, Daniel realized he wasn't waiting for the conversation to end. That also felt new. Emma eventually stood, wished him a good night, and went inside. No promise of continuation, no expectation. But the next evening, she sat down again, and the one after that. Over time, their conversations deepened, not because they pushed them there, but because there was room. Room to pause, room to change the subject, room to stop talking entirely. Daniel found himself saying things he didn't usually say out loud. Not his fears exactly, but the spaces around them. He spoke about feeling like he had missed something essential in life, about always arriving just as everyone else seemed settled. Emma listened the way people rarely do, not with solutions, not with comparisons. She listened as if his words didn't need fixing to be valid. That alone eased something tight inside him. Back at the table now, she turned a page. The sound was quiet, intentional. Daniel took a sip of tea. "Do you ever feel like," he began, then stopped. Emma looked up, waited. He didn't rush this time. "Like you're finally in the right place," he said slowly, "but you don't know how you got there?" She considered that. "Yes," she said, "and I think that's usually a good sign." He smiled, surprised by the warmth that spread through him. "How so?" "Because it means you didn't force it," she said. "You let it happen." He leaned back slightly, letting her words settle. Letting something happen had always felt passive to him, like giving up control. But lately, he was starting to wonder if control had been the thing exhausting him all along. Outside, rain began to fall at last, soft, patient. Emma closed her book but didn't move to stand. Neither did he. Nothing needed to happen next. And that, Daniel realized, was the point. Daniel had spent years believing that discomfort was proof of effort. If something felt difficult, it must be important. If it felt heavy, it must be meaningful. And if it felt calm, then surely something was missing. That belief didn't come from nowhere. It was learned, repeated, reinforced quietly over time, long before Emma, long before the evenings that asked nothing of him. Daniel grew up in a house where movement was constant, but presence was rare. His parents worked hard. That part was undeniable. Early mornings, late nights, dinner conversations that revolved around logistics rather than feelings. They loved him, he knew that. But love in that house looked like preparation. Prepare for school. Prepare for competition. Prepare for a future that demanded endurance. Rest was treated like a reward, something you earned only after you proved you were worthy of it. So Daniel learned to stay alert. Even as a child, he carried an invisible checklist in his body. Am I doing enough? Am I falling behind? Am I wasting time? Silence didn't feel peaceful then. It felt like waiting for instructions. As an adult, that feeling never quite left. He chose demanding jobs, fast-moving cities, relationships that burned brightly and collapsed just as fast. Intensity felt familiar. Chaos felt like home. Calm, on the other hand, made him suspicious. When his last relationship ended, people told him it was for the best. You weren't compatible, they said. You wanted different things. What Daniel never said out loud was that the relationship hadn't ended because of conflict. It ended because of exhaustion. Both of them were tired of trying to feel safe in a space that never slowed down long enough to hold them. So when Daniel moved into the building where Emma lived, it wasn't part of a fresh start. It was a retreat. He told himself it was temporary, a place to recalibrate. He would figure things out soon. He always did, except weeks passed, then months. And instead of urgency, something else appeared. Routine. He began noticing how the building breathed at night. How sounds softened after 10. How people stopped rushing when there was nowhere left to be. The first time Emma invited him into her apartment, Daniel almost said no. Not because he didn't want to go, but because invitations carried expectations. Conversation, performance, energy he wasn't sure he could provide. But she didn't frame it like an event. "I'm making soup," she said. "You're welcome to join if you want." If you want. No pressure, no obligation. Inside, her apartment was simple. No decorative statements, no carefully curated personality. Just clean lines, warm light, and space that felt lived in rather than displayed. They ate quietly at first. Daniel waited for the moment when conversation would need to be filled. It never came. They spoke when something felt worth saying. They paused when it didn't. That night, when he returned to his own apartment, Daniel slept without replaying the evening in his head. No second guessing, no analyzing tone or timing. His body simply shut down. That startled him more than anything. Over the following weeks, similar moments stacked gently on top of each other. Not enough to feel dramatic, just enough to feel different. He stopped waking up with his jaw clenched, stopped checking his phone compulsively during quiet moments. The nervous energy he had mistaken for motivation began to loosen its grip. Daniel didn't announce this change to anyone. He wasn't even fully aware of it yet. But his body knew. One evening, while washing dishes together, Emma asked him a question that landed deeper than she probably intended. "What does rest feel like to you?" He laughed softly. "Like guilt," he said before he could stop himself. She didn't react, just nodded slightly. "That makes sense," she said. "For a lot of people." That response, no surprise, no correction, settled something inside him. They finished the dishes in silence. Later, as rain traced lines down the window, Daniel found himself speaking again. "I don't think I ever learned how to stay," he said. Emma looked at him, not searching, not intense. "Stay where?" she asked. "Anywhere," he said, "without feeling like I should be doing something else." She considered that. "Maybe staying isn't something you learn," she said. "Maybe it's something you allow." Daniel thought about that long after he went home. Allowing had never been part of his vocabulary. He allowed deadlines, allowed expectations, allowed pressure. But allowing ease, that felt almost irresponsible. And yet, each evening he spent in Emma's presence gently challenged that belief. Nothing bad happened when he relaxed. The world didn't collapse. Opportunities didn't vanish. Life simply continued. One night, Emma mentioned that she used to move every few years. New cities, new apartments, new beginnings. "I thought I was searching for something," she said. "Turns out I was just avoiding staying long enough to feel anything." Daniel felt that sentence settle into his chest. "What made you stop?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I got tired of running from quiet." That night, Daniel walked home slowly. He didn't listen to music, didn't distract himself. He let the street sounds exist without commentary. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel behind. He felt present. And presence, he was beginning to understand, wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It arrived softly. In evenings that repeated, in conversations that didn't demand resolution, in spaces where his nervous system finally learned it didn't need to stay on guard. Belonging, Daniel realized, wasn't about being chosen loudly. It was about being allowed to arrive quietly and stay. The first time Daniel felt the urge to leave, it surprised him, not because something had gone wrong, but because nothing had. The evening had been ordinary in the most unremarkable way. Emma had cooked pasta. They ate at the table without candles, without music. Outside, the city moved slowly, as if even it were tired. After dinner, Emma washed the dishes while Daniel dried them. They worked in quiet rhythm, no tension, no anticipation. And yet, as Daniel placed the last plate back into the cabinet, a familiar restlessness stirred, a tightening in his chest, a subtle itch beneath the calm. "This is where you usually go," a voice inside him whispered, "before things get too still, before you start expecting something." He recognized that voice. It was old, protective, loud when silence lingered too long. Emma turned off the sink and leaned against the counter. "You okay?" she asked gently. Daniel hesitated. In the past, this would have been the moment he made a joke, changed the subject, found a reason to leave early, but something about the way she asked, open, unassuming, made that feel unnecessary. "I think I'm not used to this," he said. "This?" she asked, feeling settled. She nodded slowly. "That can feel unsettling," she said, "especially if you've spent a long time bracing for impact." The accuracy of that landed quietly. They moved to the couch and sat. not too close, not too far. The space between them felt intentional, not uncertain. Daniel stared at the far wall for a moment before speaking again. "I've walked away from things like this before," he admitted. "Not because they were bad, but because they didn't feel urgent." Emma didn't interrupt. "I thought if something didn't demand all of me, it must not matter." "And now?" she asked. "And now I'm realizing urgency was never the same as meaning." She smiled faintly. "Urgency keeps you moving," she said. "Meaning gives you somewhere to rest." They sat with that. The room didn't rush to fill the silence. Later that night, Daniel returned to his apartment feeling heavier, but not in a bad way. More like something had been placed gently in his hands, something fragile, something honest. Sleep came slower this time. His mind replayed old patterns. The relationships that burned brightly and ended abruptly. The jobs he left once they stopped demanding overtime. The cities he loved only until they became familiar. Familiarity, he realized, had always felt like stagnation. But what if it was actually safety? The next morning, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague. An opportunity, fast-paced, high pressure, exactly the kind of thing that would have once reignited him instantly. For a moment, his pulse quickened. "There it is," the voice said. Movement, purpose, momentum. He imagined saying yes. The late nights, the adrenaline, the familiar exhaustion he'd worn like a badge of honor. And then, uninvited, another image surfaced. Emma, reading quietly by the window, evenings without explanation, the feeling of his shoulders dropping without permission. He didn't reply right away. That, too, felt new. That evening, Daniel told Emma about the message, not seeking advice, just sharing the weight of it. She listened, then asked a single question. "Which version of you feels calmer when you imagine saying yes?" Daniel closed his eyes. The answer was immediate. "And calmer feels right?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "It feels like staying." She nodded. "You're allowed to stay," she said, "even if the world keeps offering reasons to leave." The rain returned that night, not heavy, just present. Daniel walked home slowly, letting it dampen his jacket. He thought about how often he'd mistaken leaving for growth, about how courage didn't always mean stepping forward. Sometimes courage meant resisting the urge to run. A few days later, he declined the offer. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet no. Nothing dramatic happened afterward. No regret stormed in, no sudden emptiness. Life simply continued. And in that continuation, Daniel noticed something subtle but profound. The calm stayed. It didn't vanish once he chose it. It deepened. Belonging, he was learning, wasn't about attachment. It was about alignment. And for the first time, his inner world wasn't arguing with his outer one. That night, sitting across from Emma again, Daniel realized something else. He wasn't afraid of stillness anymore. He was afraid of losing it, which meant it mattered. The evening that finally answered Daniel's fear arrived without warning. No tension in the air, no emotional buildup, no sense that something important was about to happen. That's what made it honest. Emma had invited him over on a weeknight. Nothing special, she said, just soup and quiet. Daniel noticed how that word no longer unsettled him. Quiet. Once, it had felt like something he needed to survive. Now, it felt like something he could lean into. They sat on the floor this time, backs against the couch, bowls warming their hands. The room was dim, lit only by a lamp near the window. Outside, the city hummed softly, distant enough to feel irrelevant. At some point, Emma spoke. "I'm thinking about staying," she said. Daniel turned toward her slightly. "Here?" he asked. "Yes." She didn't explain right away. "I've lived a lot of places," she continued, "and I used to think leaving meant I was choosing myself." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But lately, staying feels more honest." Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. But this time, He didn't interpret it as danger, just truth arriving. "What made you realize that?" he asked. Emma looked at him, her expression open but steady. "I stopped feeling like I had to prove anything here," she said. "I don't feel watched, or measured, or rushed." Daniel swallowed. He knew exactly what she meant. "I think," she added softly, "that's what home feels like." The word lingered between them. Home. Daniel had lived in many places too, but none of them had ever claimed that word fully. He'd always kept an internal exit open, just in case, just to be safe. That night, something shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to make space for a question he'd been avoiding. If staying no longer felt like losing himself, what was he afraid of? They didn't rush to define anything. They never had. Instead, the weeks that followed unfolded gently. Shared grocery runs, quiet mornings, evenings that repeated without losing their warmth. Daniel noticed how his body responded now. He slept deeply. He listened more. He stopped narrating his life from the outside. One evening, as they stood at the window watching rain fall again, Emma spoke. "You know," she said, "I don't need certainty." Daniel turned to her. "I just need consistency," she continued. "Someone who shows up, even on ordinary days." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought about how many times he'd chased intensity, mistaking it for connection. How often he'd believed love should feel like acceleration. But what he felt now wasn't fast. It was grounded. "I can do that," he said finally. "Not perfectly, but honestly." Emma smiled. Not brightly, not dramatically. Just enough. That night, when Daniel returned to his apartment, he didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. He felt like he was walking between two places that both belonged to him. And that realization mattered more than he expected. Weeks later, nothing in his life looked drastically different from the outside. Same job, same building, same routine. But internally, everything had rearranged itself. Daniel no longer woke up bracing for the day. He woke up present. Belonging, he learned, didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive through grand gestures or promises. It arrived through repetition, through safety, through the quiet agreement to stay, again and again. Nothing had changed overnight, but for the first time in his life, Daniel felt like he belonged. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If this quiet evening brought you even a small sense of calm, or reminded you that healing doesn't have to be loud, then you're not alone. Quiet Evenings is a space for stories that don't rush you, moments that feel safe enough to stay with, and reminders that sometimes simply being present is enough. If you'd like to spend more evenings like this together, you're warmly invited to subscribe to the channel. New stories arrive often, slowly, gently, and honestly. Until next time, take care of yourself, and thank you for being here.